Okay, awesome. So we're gonna get right into it. So I've known Paul for a couple years now. Paul's a fantastic cook. Um, Paul actually has his own business. He's the owner and operator of Open Vegan Eats. Um, Again, if you get to try his food, I'm sorry this is virtual because I wish you can actually like taste his food. It is delicious. Um, he is absolutely amazing. Last year, Paul was on also the Slipstream adventure team, and I sure he was voluntold to be the cook because, yeah, I would just go there just for the food. Um, Anyways, I'm going to hand it over to Paul unless anybody has any questions. I don't see any questions, so Paul, if you want to take it away.
Thank you very much, Riley. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining. Excuse me. Thank you for joining me for this experiential online cooking workshop. My name is Paul Vugteveen. My pronouns are he and him. And I'd like to first start by saying that I'm coming to you from Kalamazoo, Michigan, which is land that has been historically occupied by Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations. So I like to always acknowledge the land that I'm standing on when I'm providing a workshop or a class. I also like to use my pronouns to represent that this is a space that's inclusive to everyone, just like how we're going to explore the multiple purposes and uses of food in this workshop. I also think that spaces can be used in a variety of ways that are, and in ways that don't make assumptions about the people who are in the space. So I really want this to be a space for everyone, just like I want my food to be universally accessible to everyone. And now I also want to say, excuse me, my audience was here in the house was clapping for me. So I also want to just speak a little bit about the experiential learning model, which I always keep in mind when I design workshops like this. So the experiential learning model, just in brief, consists of an experience, observations, and reflections on the experience, and then forming concepts and generalizations based on the reflection of the experience, and then testing those concepts again. And it's a cycle. So ideally, we're paying attention, we're aware of what's going on during an experience, and we're just always making sure to reflect on that experience after the fact. So I had you all do a little bit of a quick writing or quick processing exercise prior to this. Hopefully you all did that. It's okay if you didn't, but that's just to get you thinking about a little bit how I think about food. So with that said, during a question and answer after we do the cooking, we'll be able to either share out some of the feelings that you might have had during that exercise. If you need any clarification about what I'm talking about or what I'm doing, we can definitely explore that in the question and answer portion of this workshop. I think that's everything I need to say prior to, before we get cooking. I do want to just reiterate, if I'm moving too fast while I'm cooking, definitely chat in, have Riley slow me down. If you have questions while we're all cooking, definitely ask. Riley will not be afraid to interrupt me. I just want to reiterate that. So without further ado, I'll start putting this recipe together with you all.
See, I can interrupt them, see? So if you guys have any questions, don't be afraid to interrupt, okay?
Thank you, Riley. So I'm going to start cooking the basmati rice first. So I have my pot with a tight-fitting lid. I like to use cast iron for cooking rice. It conducts heat really well, and the heat is actually going to come from the bottom. And as the pot heats up, it's actually going to heat up the sides of the pot as well, and that'll be really useful for getting evenly cooked rice. I'm also going to wash the rice. If you're not by a sink, or if you don't want to wash the rice, you can cook the rice without washing it. Washing it is just going to wash away any of the excess starch, and it's going to leave you with a cleaner tasting rice at the end of it. So I'm gonna just jump into the rice, cooking the rice, just so that we can get it going and have it done in our allotted time. So Riley, let me know if anyone has any questions about the rice so far, or as I proceed with this. But so I just have my medium-sized mixing bowl. I have my rice pre-measured. I'm just gonna rinse it with water about 3 times. So I'm just gonna step over to my sink really quick.
And there was a question, Paul, but I'll answer it for you. So the question is everybody going to be cooking, or it's up to you? So I just said, Ida, if you want to cook, you can cook with Paul. If you don't want to cook, you can cook with Paul. It's up to you.
Thank you, Riley. So you probably can't see too well, but I have the rice covered in water. I'm just agitating it with my fingers, just for 20 to 30 seconds each round. I'm gonna do this 3 times. As I agitate the rice, the water is gonna get milky white. That's gonna be the starch washing off of the rice. And it doesn't matter how many times you wash the rice, the water is never gonna be clear. There's always gonna be more and more starch to wash off. So you're not trying to get perfectly clean water, perfectly clean rice. You're just trying to get most of the excess starch off. You can do it fairly quickly and with minimal effort, which is what I like. I like to cook with basmati rice also because in terms of all the different rice grains, basmati is actually relatively low on the glycemic index. It's in the 50s. So, you know, as someone who has to always think about my blood sugar, basmati rice is definitely the way to go. At least that's my preference. I used to eat brown rice, but I just don't like it. So basmati is the next best thing. Each time I pour the water off, I'm not pouring all the water out just because I'm going to risk losing grains of rice. So it's okay if there's a little bit of water left in there. I'm going to put it right into my pot here. And my pre-measured water right here, this is 1.5 cups. So for cooking basmati rice, I usually do a 2 to 3 ratio rice to water. So if you have 1 cup, 1 cup of rice like we do here, you want 1.5 times the amount of water. So 1 cup of rice, 1.5 cups of water, or if you're doing 2 cups of rice, you need 3 cups of water. So, and then you can use that ratio to scale up how much rice you're cooking, or scale it down depending what your needs are. I also like to season my rice with vinegar and salt as I cook it. Salt is obviously a common ingredient that brings out natural flavors. The acidity of the vinegar, and you can use any type of vinegar you'd like. The acidity will also brighten up the flavor of the rice. So just a small correction. If you did print off the recipe, if you are looking at the recipe, we do want to bring this rice to a boil on high heat, not on excuse me, not on low heat. So that's what I'm doing here. I have it on high heat, and as that comes to a boil, I'll talk a little bit about the dish that we're going to be cooking and serving on top of that. So I have my 12-inch cast iron skillet. You definitely want to use something with a thick bottom that'll help diffuse the heat, so you're not risking too many hot spots in your pan. I've had my pan on low, so it's already a little warm. If you don't have a cast iron, I do recommend something always with a thick bottom, but if you have a non-stick, that would work well. If you are working with like a stainless steel or an aluminum pan, you do want to make sure to get your pan nice, the oil particularly nice and hot, almost to a smoke point, so that whatever protein you're working with doesn't stick to the pan. So, so I'm still going to get my oil nice and hot in my pan prior to cooking the tofu. However, I don't need to get it quite as hot because it already is a non-stick surface. So I'm going to start by adding some oil. I'm not measuring out the oil. I'm just doing this by eye. I'm just going to make sure to cover the bottom of the pan. I don't want so much oil that all my ingredients are just swimming in oil. I do try to reduce the amount of oil that I intake on a regular basis.
Hey, Paul.
Significantly, but
Paul, how do you know when your oil is hot enough?
so if you look closely, the oil will actually start to ripple, have a ripple effect, and that'll start to take place right before it starts smoking. So if you're using, what I highly recommend, just like a canola oil or a vegetable oil, something that's been refined. Don't use an extra virgin olive oil or something similar, or like a virgin coconut oil. Those oils have not been refined and therefore contain impurities, which actually lowers the smoke point. So an extra virgin olive oil might start smoking and burning and creating bitter flavors at a much lower point. So if you're using a vegetable oil that's been refined, you can get it to a much higher heat, which will allow your protein not to stick to the pan. I hope that answered the question, and then maybe more. So, and then I'm just gonna jump right into prepping the ingredients. So I have all my ingredients. I don't think you can see it on the screen, but I have all my ingredients measured out ahead of time. This is a really good way to make sure that you're not getting let me start over. If I have all my ingredients measured out ahead of time rather than measuring out as I go, it's just a quality control measure, which helps me assure that I'm not going to add too much of one thing and not enough of another. So when I'm measuring things out, I'm focused only on the measurement of the ingredients, and that'll help me assure that I have a successful recipe outcome. So I hope that makes sense. I'm going to start by chopping my block of tofu. So it's actually a half block. This is nagari tofu. It's just a really firm tofu. It has kind of a nutty flavor. I prefer it for the texture and the flavor. You can use any kind of tofu. I don't recommend using silken tofu because that won't hold together very well in the pan. But generally speaking, like a firm tofu, any firm tofu will work for this. You can also substitute any protein that you want. Any store-bought vegetarian or vegan protein will work, or if you eat meat, you can substitute anything you want into this pan, into the recipe at this point. I'm going to take a step over to my rice really quick. I am at a boil. If you're cooking along with me, hopefully you are too. I'm just going to give it a quick stir. I'm going to turn the burner all the way to the lowest setting. I'm just going to put the lid on, and this generally will take about 10 or 15 minutes to cook it through in this fashion. So I'm going to make a note of the time in my mind and hopefully not forget about it. And while that's cooking, I'll continue to prepare the tofu for the next dish. I'm going to slice it. So I have half a block that I prepared already. I'm going to cut it again in half. So I have two squares. I'm going to use a kitchen towel, just to the best of my ability, just to pat it dry and make sure that I don't have excess water from the packaging. And you can press down on it. I don't think you can see me necessarily, but I'm pressing down pretty firmly. If your tofu isn't very firm, don't press down harder than you think you can withstand. So you don't want to, you don't want smashed tofu necessarily for this part. So once the surface of the tofu is sufficiently dry, it doesn't need to be bone dry. I'm just going to continue to cube it up.
Hey, Paul, just a question while you're doing that.
Yeah.
We have somebody from the audience saying, if you're cooking with medium heat, is it okay to use uvu for frying? EVOO for frying?
Oh, that EVOO stands for extra virgin olive oil.
Okay.
Definitely, you can use that. As long as you're working with a non-stick pan, you shouldn't have to heat it to such a high point that it's going to burn. So if you are using something that's unrefined, that's okay. You just don't want to get it too hot. If you're cooking with extra virgin olive oil, you might not be able to get the tofu as crispy or as brown as you might want, or as I'm going to here, which is fine. But just know that you might have to make a few adjustments while cooking. My pan is about ready to go, so I'm gonna keep my pan on medium to high heat because I do want a nice crisp tofu, and I want there to be a browning reaction on the tofu because that's going to help us develop a lot of flavor. So now that my pan's hot, I'm going to just carefully place the tofu in. I'm gonna just stir it around a little bit, making sure that nothing is sticking. And I'm looking pretty good in my pan. I am going to stir it occasionally, but in order to get a good browning reaction on the tofu, I'm going to want it to sit for periods of time. I don't want to be stirring it so frequently that I'm not getting a browning and a crisping of the tofu as it cooks. So I'm going to let this sit, stir it occasionally. I'm going to add a little bit of salt. If you want, you can wait till the end to finish seasoning with salt, because the broth that we're going to create does have a lot of soy sauce in it, so it is going to be on the saltier side. So you might not want to add salt now. You might want to wait to taste the broth and then add more if you think it's necessary. I've done this. I'm familiar with this recipe, so I'm adding a little bit of salt. I tend to be like things on the saltier side. So once again, that's up to your preference. While the tofu is cooking, I'm gonna take half of my yellow onion. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my knife. I'm gonna cut off the root end, and then the other end, the opposite end, to get started. So this is what I'm working with now. I'm going to cut it again in half across the cut section that I've already created. And then I'm just going to take my fingers and peel the outside layers off. And I don't think you can see my cutting board, but I'll hold this up. I'm going to lay down my cutting board like this. I'm going to take my knife and just slice it as such. So I'll once I get about halfway, I'll tip the onion over a little bit and continue chopping. I'm gonna I'll show you my cutting board again once I'm halfway through. Watch your fingers. So now that I'm halfway through the onion, I'm just gonna tip this over, and then I can continue chopping it with my knife fairly easily. So now that I have my onion chopped up, this is all the processing that we're going to have to do between the between the tofu and the onion. So I'm just going to set this in a mixing bowl or any other container to have it handy for when we remove the tofu and then continue the cooking process. So I always like to have a variety of small mixing bowls or other containers nearby while I'm cooking. Just you never know when the spirit's going to move you to need one. So I'm just going to set this aside for now. I'm going to stir my tofu again.
Hey, Paul, if they cannot eat an onion, is there another ingredient they can use for flavor?
I'm sorry, Riley, could you say that again?
If they can't eat onion, is there another ingredient they can use for flavor?
Yeah, so when cooking, I tend to go towards, well, first flavors that I like and flavors that are high in umami. So things that have a natural savory flavor component to them. So things like mushrooms are high in umami. That's going to be add a savory flavor to the dish. Tomatoes are going to add that. There are a lot of ingredients, and some of the ingredients that we're putting into the broth do have those umami flavors. But really, I like this recipe, and I like recipes that allow you to substitute really anything you want. If you like carrots, just substitute or add carrots in at this point. You can add celery. Really, any vegetable that you want to use, you can use. If you don't like onions, if you want to stay away from using onions for whatever reason, please feel free. So my tofu is getting sufficiently browned and crispy. So I'm just going to let this cook a little bit more. I am going to lift the lid to my rice, and I'm just going to peek, see how it's doing. I'm going to take my rice paddle and just see how much moisture is left in the pot. There is definitely a lot of moisture left in the pot. So maybe like another 8 or 10 minutes, maybe. We'll see. I've been wrong before, so we'll see how long it takes. I'm going to stir my tofu just a little bit, making sure that any parts of the tofu that haven't been browned or touched by the pan, I'm making sure to get those pieces of the tofu down into the oil. And the browning reaction is going to develop flavors that are going to be really good for our dish. And then the crispiness is just a helpful texture to keep some variety in the dish so that everything's not the same texture. You know, we're going to have beans, which are soft. We're going to have spinach, which is soft. Yeah, we just want to make sure that we're just developing the flavors and textures for the best possible outcome. I'm going to be using canned black-eyed peas. You can use any bean that you want. You can use, this recipe is designed just to use 1 full can of beans. And I just want to make a note now. I'm going to be using the liquid that's in the can. So don't necessarily drain it. I'm going to be counting on that liquid to make some of our broth. I'm using water today because I don't have vegetable stock, but you can use vegetable stock or water in addition to the liquid from the beans. I'm also using, for the broth, soy sauce, apple cider vinegar. You can use any type of vinegar you want. If you don't like vinegar, feel free to substitute another acidic component like lemon juice. Maybe something that is not doesn't have like that little bit of vinegar funk to it. I'm using maple syrup for a sweetener. A sweetener is helpful to balance the sour that comes from the vinegar. And then, so I'm using maple syrup, which is, again, another a sweetener that's a little bit lower on the glycemic index than just granulated sugar. Definitely feel free to use whatever sweetener you want for this. And then garlic powder, paprika, both of those items I have measured out. Some optional ingredients that I included in the recipe, which I'll be using today, chili flake. If you don't like spicy food, this is just a little bit on the spicy side. That's my puppy, Georgia. So the chili flake is an optional ingredient. Liquid smoke is an optional ingredient. I do highly recommend liquid smoke for this, for a lot of applications, but this one in particular is going to help bring some of those umami or savory flavors that are often missing in vegetarian or vegan cooking. So I do recommend using liquid smoke. And then the only other ingredient I have is fresh spinach. So, and that's going to be added at the very end. So my tofu is sufficiently browned. I'm going to take either a slotted spoon or I'm going to use a slotted spatula. I want the oil that's in the pan to remain, but I'm going to take the tofu out for the cooking of the onion. I did turn my pan down to low at this point because we don't need the pan nearly as hot to cook the onions as we do to brown the tofu. I'm just going to set this aside. At this point, I'm going to just toss my onions in. The onions are going to cook fairly quickly, and they're going to brown out around the edges, which, as we know, will develop really good flavor. I'm really just going to be using the residual heat of my cast iron to cook this, to cook the onion. So I'm just using my wooden spoon here just to break up the onions, make sure that everything's getting in contact with the pan. While I cook these onions, I'm just curious, Riley, if there are any other questions that I can answer right now.
There's a lot of questions about if they can eat it, but don't think that's possible yet.
Sorry, could you say that again? I have the sizzling of onions in my ear.
There's a lot of questions about if they can eat your food, but I don't think that's possible yet.
Yeah,
Also,
okay.
too, the comments about their kitchens are starting to smell amazing.
Oh, excellent. Good. Mine too. How's my speed? Am I cooking too fast? Am I talking too fast? Anything like that?
Is anybody finding a problem at all out there, or is everybody going pretty good? I'm getting all good, all good, all good. And then just to let you know, Paul, you have roughly about 10 minutes left.
Excellent, thank you.
No problem.
So since I have about 10 minutes left, I am turning up the heat on the onions. They have started to brown up a little bit. I just want to make sure that I can get everything back in the pan into temperature, and then be ready to eat. I think I'll be having an early lunch today.
Actually, there is a question out there for you, Paul.
Yeah.
What is in liquid smoke exactly? Never noticed it at the grocery store or had to use it.
I get this generally at any supermarket by me will have this. I usually find it near the barbecue sauce. Liquid smoke is just it's smoke infused water basically. Some brands will have some other flavoring components in it, but I usually get one that if you look at the ingredients, it's just will list smoke and water. This is good for adding to sauces, adding to soups. You don't need a lot of it. We're using like an eighth of a teaspoon today. It's just going to add a little bit of a smoky flavor. You can actually use it in such small amounts that it doesn't taste necessarily smoky, but it will just add an umami sensation or a savory sensation. So that's generally how I use it more broadly. And then if I do want something to be smoky, I can let it rip. So.
And actually, Paul, I lied. You have about 20 minutes left. Sorry.
Oh, good. Well, that'll be good. Because we can wrap this up and then do like a question and answer sort of experience.
Perfect.
I'm going to check my rice again. My rice is pretty much done. I'm just turning off the heat. I could have turned off the heat a couple minutes ago when there was still a little bit of water left in, because there is so much residual heat. These cast irons will really hold on to the heat and keep cooking after you remove the heat, the pan from the heat. I also want to say, if you have a rice cooker at home, feel free to use that. You definitely don't need to use a stovetop like this to cook your rice. Rice cookers are very convenient, so please feel free to do that. So I'm gonna do my best to hold up my onions just so you can see them. So, I think they're sufficiently browned. They're not necessarily thoroughly caramelized, which is fine. But at this point, I'm just going to add all the ingredients that I have prepared, except for the spinach. So I'm also going to add back into the pan the tofu. And I'll just list off the ingredients as I go. So I'm adding the tofu, my can of beans, including the liquid, my half a cup of stock or water, paprika and garlic powder. If you want to substitute fresh garlic and saute that with the onions, you feel free to do that. You don't necessarily need to use the garlic powder. I'm adding my chili flake, apple cider vinegar. Just turning up the heat on my pan a little bit to bring everything up to a boil. I'm using soy sauce here. You can use any soy sauce alternative, like tamari or liquid aminos. That is a salty ingredient. So again, feel free to add less of that than I am. And then maple syrup.
Just to make sure, that was still two tablespoons of soy sauce, right, Paul?
That's correct.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, perfect. And now that I have the heat back on the pan, I'm just bringing it back up to a boil or a simmer. It doesn't really have to cook any further because we're using our onions are cooked, our tofu's cooked, the beans are already cooked. We just want it warm enough to serve. So for food safety purposes, we definitely want it to reach at least like 165 degrees Fahrenheit.
Also, another question just came in, Paul. Is
Yeah.
coconut sauce a good replacement for those who can't use soy sauce?
That's a good question. I actually had something in my fridge here. 1 second. I don't know if this is, I believe this is soy and gluten-free. I'm not sure if it's available near you all. It's called no soy, soy-free sauce. I've also, I think what the participant is asking is if coconut aminos are a good substitute. And I would use either of these would definitely be a good substitute. It may not be an exact substitute. I don't have a lot of experience using that product, But yeah, I would definitely start by substituting it directly.
I think you answered the question.
Yeah, thank you. At this point, I am simmering a little bit, so I'm just going to actually turn the pan off. If you're ready to eat or ready to serve this, you can just stir in the spinach. The spinach is going to wilt very rapidly, so you don't need to continue applying heat. I'll add it now. And it's a lot of spinach at first, but it will wilt down pretty significantly. I'm just going to gently press it into the liquid. Stir it around a little bit. I'm being just very careful not to flip spinach off onto my floor, onto the counter or stove. I'm always this careful, I promise. My stove is always clean. So at this point, if you are ready to eat, you can just take your rice. You can fluff it a little bit with a fork or a spatula or a spoon. I'll just demonstrate really quick. This is actually about 4 servings for someone like me. I usually eat about 5 ounces of rice at a time. So this will yield about 20 ounces or 4 servings. But generally speaking, I'll just put a little rice in my bowl. My spinach is about wilted. So if you just take a wooden spoon or a serving spoon, you can just kind of scoop it up. Try to get some of that broth with it. And this is about 2 servings for the bean and tofu dish. It's about 2 servings if you eat like me. So it is a lot of food. And I do recommend, feel free to have fun with some hot sauce, other toppings. I didn't add any more salt because I know the ingredients will, especially with the soy sauce, will be kind of a salty, on the higher end of salty, or it's not supposed to be salty. It's supposed to be just the right amount of salt, and then some fresh cracked pepper on top, and then that should be ready to go. And I think now would be a good time to enter into a question and answer portion of the workshop. I do want to just call back into our attention, like the fast processing or the processing work that we did prior to the workshop, if you had a chance. And I just wanted to think about, also to think about like the purposes that food serves. So I know especially during the pandemic, largely my eating has been driven by my emotions, not so much what my body actually needs. And I just want to lift up that that's a very valid reason to be eating. I know it can complicate things, especially those of us with type 1. But I just want to bring that into the room and just acknowledge that we eat for a variety of reasons, and they're all valid. And there are different parts of us that need feeding at any given time. So I just want us to think about that as we talk about food, not only just in this room, but in our broader circles, in our broader networks. You know, depending on where our question and answer portion goes, I like to share some techniques that I use to help build my emotional awareness using food as a lens for that. So, but in terms of the cooking process, you know, I hope those of you who were able to cook along with at home were able to, number one, have a successful experience, But number two, recognize that even if you didn't have a successful experience through reflection and learning and growing, there's really no such thing as a failure. But I really do hope that you have lunch now. So with that said, I think I would love to open it up to questions, either about anything really. So I think Riley.
Yeah. So if anybody has any questions, I can see all your videos. So if you just raise your hand, I'll mute you, and then we can ask Paul any questions that you have. And anybody?
Anybody?
Come on, Jade. I know you have a question. Oh,
I'll ask a question. So Paul, if you were gonna take this like backpacking, how much would you prepare in advance, and like how would you pack it up and stuff to take it out on the trail and cook it in the woods?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So another reason why I like to use basmati rice is because it cooks so fast. And it can be tricky on the trail because you might be using a pot with that's a lot thinner. You might not be carrying a cast iron pot with you backpacking, but you can definitely make it work. It takes a little more attention to cook it on the trail, and like something that doesn't have a thick bottom. It might be cold out, so you might be losing a lot of heat as it simmers or as it sits. So just be mindful that that's tricky. You could, if you wanted to, substitute instant rice. I've done that before. So you just, you'll bring minute rice or something. You bring water to a boil, you add your minute rice and cover it for 5 minutes. And at the end, you have something that's similar to rice. And then the other thing I would substitute would be the beans. You can actually get a lot of high quality dehydrated beans that you can take with you. You can just, they do require a little bit of cooking. But I do find if you add water to the dehydrated beans ahead of time, like right when you get to camp, if you're backpacking or something like that, the cook time is very minimal. It's a very quick cooking process. And then I would probably admit, I wouldn't bring fresh spinach. You can get like some dehydrated vegetable mixes to just throw in per your preference. You might skip the tofu, you might skip the fresh onion. With the beans and the rice, you're going to get enough protein and carbohydrates for that amount of physical, I guess, exercise or exertion while backpacking. So you might eat a lot more. I definitely eat a lot of that sort of thing on the trail. Thank you for that question, Sylvie.
And I see Janet holding up her bowl. It looks delicious.
Awesome.
Any other questions out there, guys, at all for Paul? Or if you've been cooking along, why don't you show us what you're actually making there? Oh, we got one. We got Jade showing us her pan.
Nice pan.
We got Pam showing us her pan. Or her pan, sorry.
Nice.
Oh, there was a question earlier. So if somebody has a liquidy, is there anything besides boiling it out that they can do to make it less liquidy?
I would suggest just, at this point, probably not. If you do try to boil it out, it's just going to concentrate the flavors also. So be mindful of that. So it might get more salty the flavors might get more intense as you boil it out. So what I would recommend is if you're eating it now, just reserving some of that liquid in the pan. Don't put it all in your bowl. If you do want to end up with a dish that's not as brothy, then just add less stock or less water. Or maybe think about draining the beans. Yeah, it's a good question.
Jade, I'm going to unmute you, Jade. Give me 1 second here. You're unmuted, Jade. Go ahead.
If you were making this like now to eat like later on in the day, you just wanted to do it now and put it aside, is there any part of the process you would leave and then do just before you're going to eat it?
That's a great question. Thank you very much, Jade. I would probably hold back the spinach because I do like the spinach. When I do cook it, I do like it not 100% wilted when it like hits the plate or when I start eating it. And you don't want to like cook it too long because then it starts to like really deteriorate. So a lot of like reheating and cooling and reheating and cooling will kind of make that maybe a less than favorable texture. But in terms of the rice, I always cook a lot of rice ahead of time and then just reheat it in the microwave. So you will have a little leftover rice if you were following along with this recipe. And I just find that's helpful to cook the rice ahead of time, just so I don't have to go through that process every single time.
Yeah. So would you suggest like doing everything else and then maybe putting it back in the pan to heat and then do the spinach then at that time?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Jade. Any other questions out there at all, guys? Oh, we got Mur with a question. Oh no, I don't want to know if I unmute her or not. Here's Mur. Mur, you're live now.
Hi, everyone. Paul, I was wondering if you'd be open to sharing some more trail food favorites that are plant-powered.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I generally, everything I do is generally centered around beans and rice. So making sure I have a variety of beans to take along. I usually, Basmati rice is pretty standard for me. And so, but you can do like chilies. You can essentially just mix up the vegetables you're using and mixing up your broth or like the flavor base. So you can do like really bring in a lot of different cuisines. Like you can bring in some Mexican food. You can bring some Indian food. You can bring in, whatever your tastes lead you to desiring. And then, those are more like dinners when you're gonna like set up a camp or set up or something. For lunches, I'll do like peanut butter and jelly on pita. I'll usually bring like some peanut butter powder or something like that. Something that's not too heavy. Dehydrated hummus and pita or tortilla. And maybe repeat day after day. Quick cooking oats or instant oatmeal is good for breakfast. I have a tendency to bring some pancake mix and just do that wherever I am. So that's just a little treat I like to do. It's also tricky, but it's worth it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? We got about 5 more minutes left. So does anybody else have any questions at all? I see Janet's eating hers and I'm sort of getting jealous right now. Anybody else with any questions? It doesn't even have to be about this. It can be about anything if you want at this point for Paul.
I have a question for Janet, and I'm curious how the food is.
It tastes really good. I did not have spinach. I also used chicken instead of tofu. My grocery order I had done right before we had sent out the list. So I had to just make do with what I had.
Yeah.
But I also ate pizza like an hour ago, but I'm still like enjoying this.
Oh yeah, cool. It's enjoyable even on a full stomach.
Yeah, like it's not too salty, and like I always burn my rice on the stove whenever I try to cook it. So like you actually kind of gave like kind of those little helpful tips of like checking your rice midway through because mine was done early.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I saw Jade had a question, but it looks like she's testing hers.
I was just gonna waste time and say, what's your favorite meal to cook while I'm tasting mine?
Oh, favorite meal to cook. That's so hard. I don't know. So none right now because I've been cooking so much from home. Since Michigan has been under our stay-at-home order, which is like we've been home for like over a month now. My partner Lindsay and I have been cooking 3 meals a day every day. So none would be my.
Tired of cooking.
But we've made some cool things like homemade pizza. We made some lasagna, which was good. We've been making waffles every weekend, and then stocking our freezer so you don't have to, you know, whip up the batter and get all messy and stuff. So yeah, breakfast is definitely up there on my favorite meal to cook.
Awesome.
Awesome. Any other questions that we have out there? Again, we got about like 4 more minutes left. I see a lot of people tasting theirs, and I'm getting really jealous and really hungry. If anybody wants to send theirs to Niagara Falls, that's fine. And I saw Joanne had a question, so oh, sorry, Anna, do you have a question?
No, the one thing I was going to say, I live on a sailboat most of the summertime usually. It's not going to happen this year with everything happening, but limited to space and keeping things cold, but bootable, I'm sure. I think it was maybe Paul's recipe that he used before for some of the Slipstream events, but yeah, the bootable is so good with leftover rice, whatever you have on hand. Very, very tasty.
Nice, thank you. And then Joanne, did you have a question, love?
So I just wanted to say I really enjoyed the process of doing the activity ahead of time. I think a lot of individuals, well, I can speak for myself, with diabetes have disordered eating. And my relationship with food is really conflicted, particularly growing up before you could bolus for carbs. You just took the same insulin every day and ate to the carbs. So it's really interesting because I don't like to cook and I see food as medicine, and I don't really enjoy it unless I go out to a restaurant and then it's a treat. So this is really interesting to think about food differently and think about cooking. Like I took this one because I want to learn to cook with passion and with love as opposed to functional. Like just get the food in, get her done.
Nice. Thank you very much for that feedback. I really appreciate that. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Joanne. And Paul, where can they find you if they want to go online and try to track you down or follow your recipes or anything?
Yeah, so I think the best place right now to find me would be on Instagram. It should be, my handles are listed on the recipe handout that you should have received. But at the Vugbug, my last name is Vugteveen, so that's where that comes from. And then at Open Vegan Eats, which is the name of the business that I co-run with my partner, Lindsay. So either of those two places to find me would be great. If you do have any follow-up questions, please feel free to email me. My email address is paul@openveganeats.com. And I will be sure to respond. If you have any questions about any of this, the process of cooking, ingredients, thinking about food more broadly, anything would be welcome.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Paul. And for everybody that's making the meals, I know Janet's already done it because we saw it on Facebook already. But if you actually want to hashtag Slipstream20 and show us your final products, that would be absolutely amazing. And everybody can check it out there. If there's no other questions for Paul, again, you can find him at the Vugbug. I'm going to pronounce that wrong. Or Open Vegan Eats. Also Paul at openveganeats.com. Is there any other questions? Because we have like 1 minute left. No, then I'm going to basically say thank you very, very much, Paul, because I've had a pleasure. And I think everybody else that's eating right now, I see some claps going on there.
Awesome.
So if you want to unmute yourself and thank Paul, that would be awesome. And then we'll say goodbye to you guys for now.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks
Thank you,
so
Paul.
much, Paul. Good to see you, everyone.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you
Take
all.
care.
Yes.
Bye.
Thanks.